Hello, my name is Dwayne O'Neill, and I'm a co-administrator of the Family Tree DNA O'Neill project. And today I'm going to have the topic on the Tyrone and Fews O'Neills and their DNA connections. And this presentation was put together on July of 2021, and the DNA information is current as of that date. But there'll be a new information coming in after that date, which won't be reflected in this here presentation. The purpose of the presentation is to share some of my insights with the Tyrone and Fews members, and also to provide an overview of the Tyrone and O'Neill Fews clans. I'd like to summarize the O'Neill variety. Sometimes it's called the Royal O'Neill DNA landscape. As part of that detail, the DNA Haplogroup tree said 1513. And then to mesh that DNA tree to traditional O'Neill genealogy, and then summarize where we are and the future of O'Neill DNA discoveries. For the Tyrone and Fews O'Neills, it's a branch of, as mentioned, the Royal O'Neills, and it started with the ancestor who died around 1226. The center of power was in the counties of Tyrone and Armagh, and the Tyrone O'Neills wrestled with the Clanboy O'Neills over the years to be what's called the O'Neill, or the recognized O'Neill, recognized person of all the O'Neills. The power culminated in the Fight of the Earls, which took place in 1607, when Hugh O'Neill and about 90 of his followers left Ulster for mainland Europe. The traditional territory of the Tyrone Fews, as indicated in this diagram, is in the counties of Tyrone and Armagh. And they were bounded by the O'Kanes on the north side, the Clanboy O'Neills to the east, and other Irish groups. For some background information, a few articles here, one being an article entitled Irish Lives Remembered, and it's an overview. Mark Henry has done a series of papers regarding the Fews, and they're very noteworthy in detailing the genealogy of the Fews. Another article of interest is called in History Ireland, called Creating Facts on the Ground to the Destruction of the Clanboy. And then for the traditional ancestry, John O'Hart and the Kings of Ulster, Princes of Tyrone, outlines the pedigrees of the O'Neills. And then the Desmond O'Neill put together a book called The Ancient and Royal Family O'Neill that details the pedigree as well. And it's currently in CD form that can be gotten through Sean O'Neill, the administrator of the project. The Family Tree DNA O'Neill project, we have almost 1,000 members now, and the kits have completed either autosomal, Y-DNA, or mitochondrial testing. And autosomal covers all of one's family lines. Mitochondrial is the female line only, and Y-DNA is the male line only. For Y-DNA, there's 3 types of testing. STRs, which stands for short tandem repeat polymorphisms. SNPs, which stands for single nucleoid polymorphisms. And the big Y test, which includes results for the SNPs plus private variants, which are variants that are specific to that one particular kit And the private variants, when another kit matches one of them, then they're named and form another named SNP. The haplogroup describes the terminal SNP that is shared with one or more other kits. So it's sort of it's a short form, and it's the most recent named SNP. For the O'Neill project, there's two main groupings, one being the O'Neill variety, and the second one being the ONeil. And plus there's several what I'd classify as old Irish groups. In the O'Neill project, this is the traditional display of the STR groupings. And on the right-hand side here is a subgroup 1B1 of the O'Neill variety, and they're all positive for Z1513. And they're also positive for BY3292, which is associated with the Clannaboy O'Neills. On the left-hand side here are the kits that are listed under groups 1B2, and they're O'Neill variety and positive for Z1513, but negative for the Clannaboy BY3292. This here listing that family tree DNA gives is listed by STR value changes and is of limited value because within the subgroups, there isn't any real logical listing of branches and sub-branches. So it's difficult to really interpret how the kits are related within the subgroups. However, with a haplogroup structure, as I mentioned, describing the terminal SNP, for Z1513, there's a listing there of the SNP pedigree, starting with P312. And under Z1513, there are 4 branches. And the two of the branches have only 2 kits each. That's BY31270 and BY57572. On the right-hand side, under BY3292, there's 23 kits in total, and they're associated with the Clannaboy O'Neill line. On the left-hand side is FT32273, and it is associated with the O'Neills of Tyrone and Fews. And it contains 26 kits. For the Tyrone Fews kits, in looking at the geographic locations, there's about 13 kits that have identified their earliest known ancestor geographic location as being in Ulster. 4 of the kits from just in Ireland itself. 8 kits that have only indicated a US location, and then 3 kits from an unknown location. But as indicated here, the 13 kits that indicated a Ulster location, almost all of them are either in or very close to the traditional Tyrone and Fews geographic location, which is another indication that FT32273 is associated with the Tyrone and Fews. This here is another level of detail under Z1513, again with the 4 branches. On the right-hand side again is the Clannaboy line, and with 4 sub-branches under it. And one of the kits under FGC 37026 has a known lineage, Clannaboy lineage, and up through, and it is actually associated with Edinburgh Castle, or more commonly known as Shane's Castle line. On the left-hand side here is the haplogroup structure for FT32273, and it includes branches and sub-branches. And noting here that there is at present 3 kits that have known O'Neill pedigrees. And the 2 kits on the lower left, okay, are associated with the line, including Shane the Proud. The 3rd kit, okay, is a known pedigree associated with the Fews, going to Owen O'Neill, who died in 1456. Noteworthy here is that under Z5254, there's at present 2 named branches, FT84193 and BY 192502. But also there are 8 additional kits that don't have any common private variants. And so we're looking at new kits that come in that would match some of the private variants of those 8 kits and to form new named branches. So if you're a member of the O'Neill variety and have your haplogroup number handy, you might want to have a look at this diagram and see where you fit into it. This here view graph is really just another representation of the previous diagram for the Tyrone Fews. And I wanted to note that each SNP branch represents another son/grandson, great-grandson line. So as an example, in the upper here under FT32273, there's 2 known branches right now, FT87684 and BY 211644. And so those SNPs would have formed after an O'Neill ancestor who had 2 sons. And those SNPs would have been formed either with that son or a grandson or a great-grandson along that line. SNPs on average form about every 80 years. And so that's one way of timing where these SNPs might have, the dating of these SNPs. And SNPs, some of them, they form individually, but when there's testing, there can be a block of SNPs. So as indicated in the bottom left-hand side, there's a block of SNPs, FT124092 and 2 others. And it's not determined the order of how those SNPs were formed. The last one could have been formed first, or they could have been formed in any order. And that block of 3 SNPs, okay, would have been typically formed over a time span of about 240 years. This here diagram is the pedigree of the Tyrone Fews traditional genealogy. Okay, starting with the overall ancestor who died in 1199. And underneath him, the individual died in 1226, would have been the ancestor for the Tyrone Fews. A brother of his was the ancestor of the Conboy O'Neills. And this is a simplified form and showing the son of the O'Neills. Noteworthy is near the bottom, Owen, who died in 1456. I've indicated here that he had 13 sons, and 2 of them, Henry and Hugh, being of lines that are associated with existing O'Neill kits. On this diagram here, I've overlaid the traditional ancestor of the Tyrone O'Neills with the SNP haplogroup structure. And this is based upon, as an example, on the left-hand side, the known kit under the bottom left, okay, of having that SNP pedigree. And the positioning, the order of these SNPs would be as per this diagram, but the specific timing is an estimate. And as an example, under FT32273, I've here given it as being under the individual number 113, but that SNP could have been formed either earlier or later than that, as an example. Noteworthy here is the SNPs around the green circle, and that there, okay, has as a common ancestor Shane the Proud, and Shane the Proud, okay, is, and through that line of Owen and Henry. So as an example, those two kits have FT84193 as a common SNP. And so they would have had a common ancestor, probably on individual 119. Another one is the individuals associated with the blue circle, okay, and so that that's a SNP branch, okay, and I just there's some strong indications that those kits are associated with that particular line there with Obrien, who died in 1449. So we'll go into some details a little bit later on. The third kit, as I've shown here, okay, is the line with the known ancestor of the Fews. And the Fews ancestor is Hugh, who was also a son of Owen. And so, those kits, all those three known kits, okay, have as a common SNP Z5254. So Z5254 would likely have been associated with either Owen or his dad. And some details here around and so again here, this here is the kits associated with Shane the Proud, and the two kits on the right-hand side being under FT82512, okay, have their own private SNPs, and then the other two kits under FT124092, okay, then all four of those kits share FT84193 under Z5254. And so if we overlay this with their traditional genealogy, we come down to Owen, who died in 1456, likely associated with Z5254. And then one of the individuals underneath that being associated with SNP FT84193, and possibly even being Shane the Proud. And then branching from underneath Con O'Neill, who died in 1564, are two sons. And one of the sons, okay, is associated with the two kits on the left-hand side in that line. And then the second son, okay, being associated with the line that, and those two kits have John Baton Payne, who died in 1836, as a common ancestor. And The Payne name is associated with descendants of Shane the Proud. That line changed its name to Payne to disguise themselves because they were being hunted down by assassins of descendants of Shane the Proud. This is the Obrien cluster, and under SNP BY 176666, and it's distinct from the branch of the Tyrone Fews, said 5254. In this here cluster, there's 5 kits that have done Big Y 700, and 4 of these kits have either an Obrien or Bryan surname. There's another set of kits that have done Big Y 500, and another Obrien that's done SNP testing too. And there's another 2 kits that have only done STR testing. And as shown here under BY 176666, there's at least 3 sub-branches. And it is the strong indication that this here is connected with a branch of the O'Neills with Brian, who died in 1449. And in 1435, Brian was seized by O'Neill, and Brian's hand and foot were severed, and 2 of his sons were mutilated, and 1 died immediately. And so Obrien being a name of descendant of Brian, and there'd be a good reason for this set of descendants to change their name from O'Neill to Obrien, given their history. And looking forward for the coming year for goals, I'd like to confirm the identity of the other Tyrone and Fews seps that are associated with FT32273, in particular the Fews. And we get a couple of kits with a known genealogy. For all the O'Neill variety kits that have only tested to either 37 or 67 markers, encourage them to upgrade to at least 111 markers, and ideally to the Big Y. By going to 111 STR markers, there's been able to identify signature STRs that are associated with particular haplogroups for both the Tyrone Fews and also for the Clanaboys. And so by having that number of markers, we can predict which branch that you're likely in. The intention here is to close the gap for the O'Neill kits that have hit the Irish traditional research early 1800 brick wall. And that's because there's a few genealogical records associated in Ireland earlier than 1800. And particularly for those kits that have only been able to trace their lineage back to the United States and haven't been able to come across and into Ireland with traditional genealogy. Also with the Clanaboy line, we'd like to identify several sub-branches that are associated with BY 3292. An overall summary, the O'Neill project is just one example of many surname projects that have made significant advances through broad-based STR and Big Y testing. And with that, we're now very close to relating identified haplogroups to specific O'Neill seps. I'd like to give a sincere thanks to all the kits in the O'Neill project, especially those that have completed Big Y upgrades. This here is, I feel, the golden age of genealogy research through a broad range of genetic genealogy tools. Thank you.